and welcome to Idaho Bigfoot. I'm your host, Jeff. As you can see, I'm out in the forests of Idaho. It's really pretty today. Unfortunately, there's some hornets and stuff flying around, but other than that, it's been pretty good. I'm a little sweaty and a little dirty today, so I apologize for how I look, but I wanted to get out here today and just film this video real quick because I've been putting it off for about a month now, just trying to do other things, and I don't want to put it off any longer. If you have ever watched a YouTube channel where someone has put out bad information and then they never corrected it, and then you've gone around quoting them because you assume that they did a good job and you learn the hard way to double check everything that someone says, then I think you can appreciate why I'm so frustrated, because I don't want to be that guy, right? We've all watched channels where someone, go away fly, where someone, I swear I don't smell that bad, where someone does something like that, and it's frustrating. You know, you should be able to trust people, but unfortunately you can't, even me. That's why I always ask people to do their research, to double check everything I say, and I always appreciate it when people correct me in the comments. This one gentleman actually did that for me on the video, auras, the freeze response, and how Sasquatch hides from thermal cameras. It was episode 27. That was about 3 videos back, if I remember correctly. And, you know, I had posited, and it's a good video, by the way, overall. I stand by it, but I just made an error here in regards to thermals. Overall, I think it was a pretty good video, and I brought out some very good information about auras, what they actually are, because there is a science to it. It's just kind of been hijacked by woo-wooers, right? Which I don't necessarily have a problem with people who are into woo and woo-woo. I disagree with some of it, if not a lot of it. But, you know, I do acknowledge that it's perfectly possible for the paranormal and stuff in like the 4th dimension, for example, to exist. The problem is when people hijack stuff that is perfectly rational and they kind of lasso it in to their circle, and they associate, for the average person, this idea, like auras, into their woo-woo, oftentimes occult type, New Age religions, or philosophies, or whatever. They have every right to do what they want to do. I can disagree with it all day long, but it just can be frustrating sometimes when they wrangle something like auras into their circles, because the aura is auras are a real thing. There's some science behind them to back it up, and I shared that in that video. I think a lot of people misunderstand them. I think a lot of people misappropriate them, or appropriate them and then misconstrue them. But regardless, there's something to it, and that's something that I talked about. But essentially, I made this posit that Bigfoot, when they freeze, which you'll have to watch the video to fully understand, but essentially it's like an opossum, you know, they play dead. A lot of people have had that response out of the blue. You cannot control it. That's the thing. I think you might be able to if you're really in tune with your body, but regardless, I don't just believe anyone's claim. So, oh, you know, a monk did this. Yeah, sure he did. I don't know. I don't trust a monk any more than I trust anybody else, just blindly, right? I can tentatively state that they might be telling the truth, just like I do with anyone with a Bigfoot encounter, but I have to know them personally to really say much. And I don't know some guy halfway across the world. So it's just a theory as far as I'm concerned, or a hypothesis that people can control it. But regardless, it is something that does kick in for people just naturally, just like that, when faced with a predator. You know, a tiger goes by that is hungry, and you might just freeze in place, and you know, you can't control it, but it controls you. It controls your heart rate, your breathing, everything slows down. So, you know, my posit was that when Bigfoot do that, because it does seem like they do it, that's why you see reports of a tree, you know, a high cut-off stump, basically, that looks burnt to a lot of people because it's black or brown over in that direction, right? It's just a Bigfoot tucking its head down and having its arms by its side and just holding perfectly still. And I think that's exactly what they do whenever they get scared. They hear a person coming, they just kind of freeze. And then once they feel like the danger has gone by, they get up and they walk away. And that's why people have said that either the high cut-off burnt tree stump disappeared or it stood up and walked away. Or more than anything, not standing up, but just like pulled its head up and walked off. I think in some cases they could have been crouched down, but I think in a lot of cases it just sounds like this Bigfoot was standing there, just tucking its head down. So regardless, my posit was that when they do that, the heart rate slows, the flow of blood through their arms out to their extremities slows down, even in their core, it slows down, their breathing rate slows down, and so their heat dissipates. And so, you know, the thick hair in their body, especially if it's really long hair, that allows air to flow through it, let alone like a short coat and a long coat or something, whether it's hair or fur, I don't know. That's a whole nother video that I want to do. But regardless, any breeze that comes through can cool their body down, especially if it's in winter. You know, their body cools down enough to where you can't really see them on a thermal. At least it obscures them. Well, I do think there is something to that in the sense that a lot of thermals that like Flir made, that a lot of Bigfooters picked up because it was affordable. A lot of thermals are not affordable, which, you know, had a much shorter distance range. You know, you'd be looking at, you know, 300 feet. Some of them nowadays are a mile. Like I think Pulsar has a nice new one that says it can go out to a mile in distance. Regardless, those little Flirs that a lot of guys were using, and you still see them all the time, because if it works, why stop using it? You know, they were less expensive, but they also could only see about 300 feet. At least that's the advertised distance that Flir gave you. I'm sure you could still see a heat signature, but you wouldn't be able to figure out what it is. So, you know, you slow down the heart rate, body isn't constantly producing heat anymore, the fur holds it in, yada, yada, yada. Bye-bye Bigfoot. Well, that's not exactly true. A gentleman on that video, or in the video's comment section, made this comment, okay? He said, Bigfoot can easily disappear from thermal imagers by hiding behind solid obstructions that block their heat from thermal sensors. I'd imagine like a tree, right? But they can't disappear by doing what you said. He said, heat transfer from hot to cold. Decreasing their breathing will not hide their heat signature because unless they've been dead for quite some time, the thermal sensors will pick up their heat signature since their body is constantly generating heat. This is why covering yourself with mud, like in the movie Predator, can only conceal you for a short time. Eventually, the heat from your body will be transferred to the mud. Another way for Bigfoot to blend in with the background and disappear is to be at the same temperature as the surroundings. When it comes to thermal versus night vision, they both have advantages and disadvantages over each other. By the way, thermal imagers can detect heat footprints for some time, depending upon the environment. So if you were walking barefooted outside during a cold day, you could see a trail of glowing footprints following you. How many Bigfooters keep an eye on that, I don't know, but that's actually quite fascinating. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're a Bigfooter, you might just figure out where Bigfoot is by following the tracks. Keep in mind, Bigfoot can backtrack and can jump off the trail and disappear. I think a thermal would be fantastic in situations like that to help you figure out where they went. But I think that's exactly what's happened to people when it's snowy out, because that's exactly what black bears do to people. A lot of hunters will tell you that black bears are very smart and very canny when it comes to getting rid of a tail. So I shared my thoughts, and you can see that here in this screenshot. But nevertheless, I basically shared, you know, kind of my thoughts, kind of pushed back on that just a little bit, in the sense that I still thought that I might have something to it, that maybe this was just a little bit too much of a black and white kind of answer. But no, he was right, and he was very patient with me, and I appreciate that. So he said, I did factor the hair into my explanation because, as you can see there, that's something I brought up. He said, you're not factoring in the heat source. He said, like I said, there's a constant heat transfer. In this case, it's a constant heat conduction transfer from the body to the hair and radiant transfer from the hair to the air. That means that heat is being transferred from the body to the hair a lot faster than the hair to the air. Try saying that 3 times fast. Because the hair can't be taken off like a jacket does, the body and the hair would constantly be at about the same temperature. Heat will continuously transfer from one object to another object until there's equilibrium. In other words, the transfer of heat the transfer of heat doesn't stop until either both objects reach the same temperature or they're separated. So, it's like, damn, okay, oops. So I wanted to do some research, and Pulsar and Flir both actually have some articles on that. And so I just thought I'd share that with you guys. According to the article posted by Pulsar, How Thermal Pierces Through Video and Inclement Weather, an in-depth technical analysis, written by Michael Valderrama, quote, "Thermal imaging devices operate on the principle of infrared radiation. All objects with a temperature above absolute zero emit infrared radiation as a result of thermal motion of their molecules. This radiation falls into the infrared spectrum, which is divided into 3 categories. Near infrared, NIR, 0.7 to 1.5 micrometers. Mid-infrared, MIR, 1.525 micrometers. And long-wave infrared, or LWIR, 8 to 14 micrometers. Now, thermal rifle scopes, for example, primarily operate in the LWIR range because it allows for better detection of heat differences at common ambient temperatures. The core component of a thermal device is the microbolometer sensor. These sensors typically use materials such as vanadium oxide, VOX, or amorphous silicon, ASI, which have properties that allow them to detect infrared radiation efficiently. The Pulsar Merger LRF XL50, for example, uses a vanadium oxide sensor because the material has a steady response to temperature changes, making it a prime material for instruments that detect temperature changes. This detector is the heart of the thermal scope, consisting of millions of tiny sensors sensitive to infrared radiation. Each sensor measures the minute temperature differences between incoming radiation and the unit's own baseline temperature. Uncooled detectors. These operate at ambient temperature and use microbolometers to detect infrared radiation. They are less sensitive than cooled detectors, but are more compact, durable, and require less power. Uncooled detectors are used in most Pulsar products. Cooled detectors. These are housed in a cryogenic cooler, reducing the thermal noise and increasing sensitivity. While offering superior image quality, they are more expensive, larger, and consume more power. When infrared radiation from a target strikes the detector array, it causes a change in the electrical resistance of the materials in the microbolometer. This change is converted into an electrical signal, which is then processed to create a thermal image. The variations in temperature appear as different shades of gray or color on the display, enabling the user to distinguish objects based on their thermal signature. The electrical signals from the detector array are processed by a series of algorithms to enhance the image quality. This includes noise reduction, contrast enhancement, and edge detection, which help in creating a clear and detailed thermal image. Advanced thermal imagers also incorporate image fusion technology, combining thermal data with visible light data to provide a more comprehensive view. Fog, smoke, and rain all consist of water droplets or ice crystals. These particles primarily affect the transmission of visible light, scattering and absorbing it. However, they have minimal impact on long wavelength infrared radiation detected by thermal scopes. This allows thermal scopes to see through these obscurants, offering a clear view of the environment based on heat signatures. Many Pulsar devices are equipped with laser rangefinders, which emit lasers and measure the time it takes for the beam to reflect off a target and return to the device to get distance readings. Since a laser beam is essentially light, it can become scattered by the tiny water droplets and mist or fog, reducing the amount of light that reaches its intended target, thus giving an inaccurate reading. In foggy or rainy conditions, the temperature difference between the target and the surrounding environment remains distinct, since the target emits heat while the environment around it does not. Thermal rifle scopes use this thermal contrast to detect and highlight objects. Even in dense fog or heavy rain, the thermal signature of animals, vehicles, or humans stands out against the cooler background. However, because elements in the air, like moisture, including fog, can still obstruct imaging detailed by a thermal sensor array, imaging certainly can be degraded. Still, advances in thermal technology, including sensor resolution, enhanced germanium glass, improved pixel pitch, and even algorithm development, continue to improve thermal imaging in even in less desirable conditions. Pulsar uses these technologies together to optimize imaging in tough conditions. Thermal devices leverage the principles of infrared thermography to pierce through fog and inclement weather, providing users with a significant advantage in adverse conditions. By detecting the infrared radiation emitted by objects and processing this data into a visible image, these devices enable clear vision where traditional optics fall short. So that was pretty interesting. Excuse me. And Teledyne Flir also put an article out titled "How Do Thermal Cameras Work?" posted in 2020. Quote, "The first thing to know about thermal cameras is that they don't work like regular cameras. Regular daylight cameras and the human eye both work on the same basic principle. Visible light energy hits something, bounces off of it. A detector receives the reflected light and then turns it into an image. Thermal imagers make pictures from heat, not visible light. Heat, also called infrared or thermal energy, and light are both parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. But a camera that can detect visible light won't see thermal energy and vice versa. Thermal cameras capture infrared energy and use the data to create images through digital or analog video outputs. A thermal camera is made up of a lens, a thermal sensor, processing electronics, and a mechanical housing. The lens focuses infrared energy onto the sensor. The sensor can come in a variety of pixel configurations from 80 by 60 to 1280 by 1024 pixels or more. This is the resolution of the camera. These resolutions are low in comparison to visible light imagers because thermal detectors need to sense energy that has much larger wavelengths than visible light, requiring each sensor element to be significantly larger. As a result, a thermal camera usually has much lower resolution or fewer pixels than visible sensors of the same mechanical size. Heat sensed by an infrared camera can be very precisely measured, allowing for a large variety of applications. A Flir thermal camera can detect tiny differences in heat, as small as 0.01 degrees Celsius, and display them as shades of gray or with different color palettes. Everything we encounter in our day-to-day lives gives off thermal energy, even ice. The hotter something is, the more thermal energy it emits. This emitted thermal energy is called a heat signature. When two objects next to one another have even subtly different heat signatures, they show up quite clearly to a thermal sensor regardless of lighting conditions. This allows thermal cameras to see in complete darkness or smoke-filled environments. Now, I will say this. When you look at a zebra, right, there were some thermal imagers that were used, and you look at them, there is quite a heat difference between the white and black stripes, because even the actual color of the hairs dictates how much heat they absorb. So there is something to an animal not being as easy to record as others. I mean, I'd imagine polar bears and snowshoe hares are harder to pick up compared to their brown, black, or dark gray cousins because they simply have a coat that does not absorb as much heat. However, you can still see them to some degree or another. The polar bear has a thick layer of blubber that really blocks heat, so you're not going to see it except for around the eyes, nose, stuff like that, because it's in such a cold environment. You can see it, but it's not going to stand out like a black bear would. And even just being in shade actually makes a big difference. A black bear that's in the sun versus a black bear that's in the shade looks different to a thermal imager, even when they're in the same frame. You see a difference in heat. So it's not like, a thermal imager cannot be swayed by the environment. The problem is that my theory about a Bigfoot just disappearing does not hold up. It would still show up. And like he said, I mean, it would take a while for the creature to actually disappear. And even then, it does still produce small amounts of energy. So when you're up close to it, even some of these really bad thermals, I think, would still see it pretty well. And that's unfortunate for my theory. But it's just reality, right? You got to accept it. Thermal imaging to assess the Assess the health status in wildlife animals under human care, limitations and perspectives by Daniel Mota Rojas et al. Did say this. Morphological differences among furred, feathered, and bare-skinned animals. The thermal regulatory strategies in animals depend on various morphological elements. For example, feathers serve as a thermal insulator in birds, and beaks facilitate heat dissipation. In contrast, the presence of hair and piloerection form a layer that conserves warm air to prevent any sudden drop in temperature. A thick layer of hair and dark hair color conserve heat and reduce radiation. Finally, skin color and the thickness of glabrous, skin influence the amount of heat radiation in different species. So, there can be variation for sure. It's just that you will still see some heat unless there are very unique circumstances that prevent heat from really being emanated at all. So I just thought I'd put that out there. As far as my theory goes, I do believe that there's something to them freezing in place. I just don't feel like thermal imagers would have such a hard time finding them. If you walk into the woods there just 40 feet, yeah, you pretty much disappear, except for maybe a very small heat signature. But then at that point, with most thermals, you're not going to be able to tell if there's a squirrel or an 8-foot tall Sasquatch over there. Over here, it's so thick, I don't think you'd see anything. So I just thought I'd put that out there, just so you guys know, I do apologize for getting things wrong. And shout out to the gentleman who helped me. I believe his name was Sean. Thank you very much. I appreciate you getting my attention on that and, bringing my attention to that. And thank you for being patient with me. I greatly appreciate it. So anyway, guys, talk to you later.